This is part 3 of 3 on my series about aquarium filtration media. This video is dedicated to mechanical filtration, which is the type that people are most familiar with usually. Every filter has some shape or form of it, and oftentimes if your filter came with like startup media, there's some kind of mechanical filtration pad with it. Now, mechanical filtration removes large particles from your water. So, mechanical filtration is going to catch things like poop, uneaten pellets and flakes, and leaves off of any live plants you might have, just to name a few things. Down here, we're going to start over here. This is filter sponge. This one here is the most common kind of mechanical filter media. This is the pre-cut, like pre-sized, pre-cut sponge that is typical of any brand sold for their brand of filter. Now, filter sponge comes in 3 different varieties. Coarse, which is most commonly what you find sold. Medium, and fine, which I don't have an example of. This here is the coarse, and like I said, this is the most common kind that are made by companies that are prepackaged for your filter. You can see how large the holes or the pores are in that sponge. And then this one here, this little black one, this is like a pre-filter, but this is a medium. So you can see that the pores are much closer together. And then the fine is even closer together than this. The fine almost looks solid unless you're looking under it at bright light. I don't have an example of that because I currently have it all used up. Now, sponge, it's kind of like the go-to for people. However, I don't really use a lot of sponge. I don't find that it actually catches a lot of particles. The only time sponge was really useful for me was for goldfish or plecos, because they create a lot of really big, nasty poops. And the filter sponge really caught that out very well. I'm currently using medium grade and the fine sponge, and I still find that even the fine sponge really doesn't catch a lot. I find that most of the particulates in my water practically bypass my sponge and end up in these other kinds of mechanical filter media we're going to talk about here. And I'm even using a fine grain sponge, and the only thing that I find that my fine sponge catches is the occasional leaf that has fallen off of one of my live plants and gotten sucked into my filter. I don't feel like it even catches most of the poop from my platyfish. I feel like most of that ends up going right through the filter sponge. So the next thing, which I don't have like the traditional example of, the next thing would be called filter floss. And it is designed to catch more like medium-sized particles. It is, if you look at it really close, it looks like plastic string almost that has been woven together and just matted together. Now, there's a bunch of options for replacing that, and I have 2 of them here. These here are just basic pot scrubbies. They're 100% polyester. There's no kind of pre-soap or chemical on them, and you will see they do not have the brand name printed on them, because Scott's makes something like this, but then they have actual Scott's like printed on them, I've noticed. So if you're going to use this option, just make sure there's no soaps or any kind of printing on them. I'm going to show you kind of what this looks like close up. Now these are really thin. You can find them in different thicknesses. Same thing with the actual filter floss, which I'm finding has become more and more difficult to find in pet stores as of late. I guess probably a lot of people really just didn't use it because sponge is, I would say, definitely the most popular for the most part. So I just use several of these since these are thin as my layer, and these catch a lot more, I've noticed, especially like in the fish poop category, than even my finest poured sponge. So I absolutely love this. I get these 10 in a pack for $1 at the Dollar Tree. Another option, this is also from the Dollar Tree. These are non-stick scrubbies, also from the dollar store. And I'm going to take one of these out for you here. This is just plastic. Thin pieces of plastic that have been woven together. And you can see the pore size on this is actually about the same as the sponge. So really you could use this as a replacement for a coarse grade sponge. I, to be honest, don't find that these catch a lot of particles, but it's woven and then like rolled up and folded over itself on the inside. So the pore size, the further you go through this, like closer to the center of these, is actually, the pore size is kind of smaller, so it does catch a lot more. This is very inexpensive sponge replacement if you have a large filter, such as a large trickle down filter or sump or something like that, and you just need something really cheap. That is an option to replace your sponge. But let's face it, sponge and filter floss isn't that expensive to begin with. So this stuff catches mid-grade particles. This is definitely more my go-to. I mostly use these more for actually cleaning out the inside of my tank. They're just plastic. It's just woven plastic. So I don't use these so much in my filter. I use it more for scrubbing algae off the side of my tank or that white crust, that sort of thing. I use these more so in my filter. I feel like they catch a lot more, and these hold up pretty decently to rinsing out and some cleaning when you're doing your tank maintenance. These do fairly well too. And the sponge, I don't think I've thrown out a sponge yet because it just fell apart from all the cleaning. So these kinds here do last fairly long with your maintenance. If you are using like the off-brand, just make sure if you're using something generic not made for aquariums, make sure it's 100% polyester or it's just plastic like these are. And then this over here, this is my absolute favorite filter media out there. This here is, excuse me, mind my cat. This here goes by a bunch of different names. This, you can see, is a very fine, very thick kind of filter media. This catches very small particles, and this is the kind of filtration media that I find catches and removes the most stuff out of my aquarium. So in my nano filters, where I do not have a lot of room for filtration media, I run nothing but this. For my mechanical, I don't use any of the other kinds. I maybe occasionally use Floss if I find I'm getting some big particles. But if I get a really small filter, I just use this and biomedia. That's it. So this goes by a bunch of different names. I've heard it called a bunch of different things. Fluval calls it polishing pads, cotton pad. Those are the two most common, honestly, is cotton pad and polishing pads. And this removes, like I said, very fine. So this is the stuff, if you have a bunch of really small, like dust, kind of like dust-sized pieces from your aquarium food, or the little fine white specks floating in your water from dust getting into your aquarium water. And that's unavoidable. Everybody's got some dust in their house. It gets into your tank water. It gets pushed around underneath by the filter and gets stirred in through your water column. And this is the type of filter pad that is going to catch the really tiny dust-like particles from your food and the dust from your house that's fallen in there, and really help with the white specks and murkiness. Assuming that your murkiness is not algae or bacterial bloom, which is something I touched on in part 2 of the series when speaking with chemical media. This pad here, this is the brand name, pre-cut, pre-sized, made for my specific brand of canister filter. And I forget how much my cousin said she just paid for a 4-pack of replacement pads like this. But you can save a lot of money by going getting a bag of this at any pet shop. This is 100% polyester quilt batting, which is basically this stuff. It's just polyester. It's a polyester sheet that is used when making like chair cushions or in quilts, that you can cut it to size and then you put it in whatever you're making. Same thing, you can use teddy bear stuffing, which is loose and fluffy. I like the quilt batting just because it is a sheet, so I can cut it to size, I can roll it up, it's very easy. I could just take out the whole sheet to rinse it when I'm cleaning my filter. The loose stuff that you just kind of rip apart in handfuls, it's a lot harder, in my opinion, to clean it and rinse it off multiple times because it's not really stuck together. So I prefer the quilt batting for that. Just make sure it is 100% polyester, because cotton is going to rot and break down in your tank. So just make sure it's 100% polyester. That's what, most of the fluffy filter pads, the polishing pads, are actually made out of, is just polyester. And this bag, I didn't even pay $10 for it, and I've been using it for 5 years now for a 55-gallon aquarium that has a hang off the back filter that is meant for a 100-gallon aquarium, to kind of give you an idea of how much of it I use. And the bulk of my space that I dedicate to my mechanical filtration media, it's pretty much 90% this stuff. Like I said, I do usually use a couple of these first to catch any leaves or roots, large pieces of pellets, something like that, so that it doesn't clog up my polishing pad quite so fast. But I don't really use sponge, and most of it is just this. And as I've mentioned, I've used it exclusively. This is the filter media that is always the dirtiest in my filter, which means it's catching the most stuff. And it's a very common mistake. People will have, they'll see little pieces of food and poop floating in their tank, and they think that their filter is just not strong enough, which could be part of the problem. But I find usually all they are using in their filter is this large sponge like this, which dust and little pieces of poop just go right through like nobody's business. So they just don't have the right kind of filtration media in their filter to catch the smallest particles. So this stuff is really going to help you with having nice, clear water. Highly recommend it. This stuff is so cheap. Do note a glassine coating. I'm trying to get it so you can see it on the camera. There you go. Glassine finish is safe. This is Mountain Mist brand. I bought this at Hobby Lobby, in case you were wondering. Now, this is the kind of filter stuff that a lot of people buy. This is the Whisper Bio Bag cartridge. So this is one of those pre-boxed, pre-made cartridges. I think like every brand makes them for their filter. The Aqua Clear uses the pre-cut sponge like this and pre-bagged media. But more and more filters I see, they're coming out with these like pre-boxed filter cartridges like this. And these aren't really that great. Literally all this is this is just a really thin bag of this polishing media right there, which is great because this is the Tetra. I had another brand filter where it was prepackaged like this, and it was actual like filter floss on it. So it didn't catch quite as small of a particle as this Tetra one. And then on the inside of this, it's just a plastic frame with some activated carbon in it. And it's just made to slip into the filter. And more companies are making this. It does seem to be more and more common on the smaller size internal filters, but I'm seeing more and more hang off the back filters with these pre-packaged, just slipping cartridges like this. And they're a waste of space. They're absolutely crap, in my opinion. I don't even use these. Instead, I take the space, the hollow space that is in the back of that filter where you slip this in. I just put, a little bit of this on, put a little bit of this in there, pack it full of this, and then throw a bag of ceramic bio rings on top. And I get way more media in that space because these prepackaged cartridges, you slip them in like this, and then you will still have like this much empty filter space, just blank filter space on either side of it. And what happens is the water can vary because it's going in this way. Filters pull water, they hang off the backs and the internals, they pull water up through the bottom of the filter, because you have like the tube or whatever in through the bottom, goes into the bottom slot. So your water is basically being pushed from bottom to top for filtration. This is the same thing with canister filters. Canister filters pull your water in and push it to the bottom and push it from bottom to top through the canister. So you want your mechanical filtration media to be on the bottom. You want it to be the first thing, and you want to stack it with the coarsest on the bottom and the finest particle removant on the top. That way you're kind of saving any large things from gunking up your polishing pads. So when you have one of these that are just sitting in there vertically like this, and you have the water coming up, some of the water is just going to pump to the front side of this pad and flow right out the outtake of the filter. So, and like I said, like on top of that, you have all this, you'll have like this much just empty space of water just sitting there, not coming in contact with any media when you're using these sliding cartridges like this. So you can get so much more in there if you just take loose media like this and you pack it in there so that there is no empty space for the water to possibly flow around your media. And you can get a lot more variation that way, because what if you don't need carbon? See part 2 on, why you probably don't need carbon. But let's say a fish died in the back corner, got stuck under a decor, and you didn't find it for 3 days, and now you got an ammonia spike. Well, if you're running this cartridge in there, even though there's space like this on either side of it, typically in most brand filters that are made for these, there's not enough space for you to just go out and buy a small pre-bagged cartridge of ammonia chips and stick in there. There's not a whole lot of space for you to very easily get a bag of bio rings in there for biofiltration media. And, you know, or you might get it shoved in there, but then the moment you take the cartridge out, it falls over. So now you gotta take it out, get your hands more wet to put this back in when you're changing them. Some good bacteria will grow on the outside of the filter pads, the filter floss, and the sponge, but it's not nearly as much per centimeter as what you get grown on your bio media. Also, I mean, keep in mind, you're constantly taking out these cartridges and, or, you know, your pads or whatever. You're rinsing the pads, so you're rinsing off a bunch of that bacteria. Or you're constantly just throwing out these cartridges, and so you're throwing out all your biofiltration, and there you go. You know, this is the only thing you got in there for bacteria to grow on. You can't rinse it anymore. You throw it out. You put a brand new one in there. Well, you just threw out all of your biobacteria. So you basically just restarted your tank. It's like you never cycled your tank to begin with. So that's another reason why I think these are just very terrible. You do not have a lot of control over your media. There's not a lot of things you can do in the event of something coming up. You know, you don't have a lot of flexibility with it, and you're wasting a bunch of space, water's flowing past it. So I really recommend just buy the loose stuff like this, pack it into the space, you know, put your bio rings in there or whatever. Leave yourself a little bit of space for, you know, the occasional carbon or ammonia chips should something happen that you need it. And you're just kind of a way healthier tank. It's also going to be cheaper because this is the medium size for the Tetra Whisper. So this fits, I believe it is the 10-20 gallon size filter, if I remember correctly, that I have downstairs for this. The medium. A 2-pack of this, the last time I looked for 2 of these for that filter, was $6 and some change. This entire bag of cotton fluff barely cost me that. And like I said, this lasts me years. So for the cost of 2 of these, which you're going to go through very quickly, I can buy some of this, some bio rings that you never have to replace, basically. Like, you're going to save a lot of money, and it's just a lot healthier for your tank. I think that is all on mechanical filtration. Be sure to check out the other videos in this series to learn more about the carbon and other chemical medias I was talking about here, as well as various options for your biofiltration that I referenced here today.